you're not a US resident and you've ever tried to open a US bank account, you already know how frustrating it is. You read articles that say it's easy, you watch videos that promise remote banking in 5 minutes, then you talk to a real bank and suddenly it's please visit a branch. Do you have a social security number? Sorry, we don't open accounts for non-residents. Meanwhile, you see other entrepreneurs and investors wiring money in and out of the US every week, getting access to real US banks in full compliance, often without ever setting foot in the country. So, what are they doing differently? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. How to open a US bank account remotely and as a non-resident, the real way it's done, not the fairy tale. I'm Matteo Maglia, Partnership Manager in GloboBanks, the banking introduction company for international accounts. Every week, our team helps clients from all over the world open US bank accounts, personal, business and even private banking using structured professional introductions instead of random online applications. And what I can tell you right away is this: doing it alone is possible, but doing it well, safely, and with the right bank is a very different story. Let's break it down. The first thing you need to understand is that there is no single US bank account. There are different levels of banking in the US, and the way you approach them as a non-resident is completely different. On one side, you have retail accounts, the classic checkings or savings account. On another level, you have business accounts for US companies. And at the top, you have private banking and high-end relationships with institutions like JP Morgan's private and commercial banking arms, where clients bring serious assets and get a different level of service and access. When someone says, I want a US bank account from abroad, they usually mix all of this together. That's the first mistake. Before you even think about which bank, you need to be crystal clear on 3 things: who you are, what you need the account for, and what level of the system you actually want to access. That's exactly the first step we go through at GloboBanks with every client. Let's start with who you are. From a US bank's perspective, you're not just a name and passport, you are a high risk profile. They look at your citizenship, your country of residence, your tax situation, what you do for a living, whether you have a US company or not, whether you're moving personal savings or business revenue. If you have a clean profile, clear documentation, and a reasonable study for why you need a US account, you're already far ahead of most applicants. If your situation is more complex, multiple countries, cryptos, high-risk industries, you can still open accounts in the US, but you cannot just apply and hope. This is exactly why GloboBanks exists. We don't start from which bank is easiest, we start from you. Then we reverse engineer which path and which banks make sense. Second, you have to define what the account is really for. I just want a US account is not an answer. Do you want to receive, for example, international payments in US dollars for your business? Trade US clients locally and look domestic to them? Diversify a part of your wealth into the US banking system? Hold USD liquidity to invest, buy assets or operate globally? Are we talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or multi-million balances? The strategy for a freelancer who occasionally invoices US clients is completely different from the strategy for a holding company moving 7 figures or for someone who wants a long-term relationship with a top-tier US institutions. At GloboBanks, this is where we filter out a lot of bad ideas. If your objective is small transaction and poor convenience, a classic US bank may not even be necessary. And we'll tell you that honestly, and we can go to, for example, other banks. If your objective is serious US banking, we'll build everything around that goal. Now, let's talk about how non-resident actually get into the US banking system. Most of the time, there are 3 main routes. A personal account with a US bank, a business account for a US company or also a non-US company, or a private banking high-end relationship often linked to significant assets and investments. And in all three routes, you have one big obstacle. US banks are very conservative with non-residents. They don't like uncertainty, they don't like unclear tax residency, they don't like profiles that nobody has pre-qualified. If you work in a loan or apply a loan online, you are asking them to do a lot of work to understand you, with no guarantee that you will ever become a profitable client. That's why so many people are told, sorry, we only open accounts for US residents. In many cases, that's not a legal restriction. It's simply the easiest way for the bank to say no. GloboBanks changes that dynamics. We don't send banks random strangers, we present filtered, documented, structured profiles that already tick specific boxes in terms of deposit, activity and compliance. That's why our clients get access in a situation where a DIY approach would almost always fail. Let's look quickly at the personal account route. Can a non-resident open a personal account in a US bank? Yes, in some cases. But full remote purely as an individual is rare and requirements change often. It's for this that we can do it with some banks in the US also remotely. Because usually banks want to visit you, sign documents, or video calls, lots of things. This is where hybrid strategy sometimes work best. We pre-qualify you, we identify banks that are open to your profile, we prepare documentation and your story, and then if a physical visit is required, usually we always can not let you go there, but just do it with, for example, a video call. So all the accounts we open in the US are 100% remotely, and you will have all the benefits as open it in presence, like having relationship managers, debit card, credit cards, etc., etc. Then for US company, if you run a company that invoices US clients or you want to operate through a US entity, having a US corporate account can unlock, for example, easier payments from US customers, better integrations with payment processors, a more local image for your business, and in some cases access to US financing tools in the future. But again, the story the bank wants to hear is not I opened an LLC because some YouTuber says it's great for taxes. They want to hear what does the company actually do, where are the clients, where is managed located, where is the real economical activity, why does it make sense that this company has a US account. If you show up with a brand new LLC, no clear business model, no contracts, no invoices and no introduction, you will probably be rejected. At GloboBanks, we help you build both the substance and the presentation, choosing the right company structure with your advisor, aligning your banking to that structure, preparing the documentation that proves the business is real, and then presenting that package to banks that actually accepts foreign-owned entities. Remote onboarding becomes realistic when the bank knows exactly who you are and when someone they already trust brings you to the table. And we have some options also for non-US company to access to US banks, for example. And finally, there is US private banking and upper tier relationships. This is where names like JP Morgan become relevant. We're talking about clients who bring meaningful assets, often like 7 figures and above, and who are looking for example, multi-currency management, portfolio management, and access to US markets. Credit lines, structured products, or lending, for example, against assets. In this space, trying to apply yourself is almost pointless. These banks are not sitting there waiting for an email that say, hey, I'm from country X and can I have an account? They work by relationship and introduction. This is where GloboBanks is at its strongest. We help you understand whether you're really a fit for this level, align your assets and your expectation with what these banks actually want, prepare your financial profile in a way that makes sense to a US private bank, and then use our existing relationships to start a serious conversation 100% remotely. If it fits, onboarding can be initiated for sure remotely, with structured calls, secure document exchange, and a very different tone from the standard branch experience. Now, let's talk about the remote part directly. When people say, I want to open a US account, a US bank account remotely, what they usually mean is, I don't want to waste time and money, and I don't want to play trial and error with banks I don't understand. And also I don't want to deposit any money on the account. And that is 100% reasonable, you know. Remote doesn't always mean zero contacts. It means zero chaos, no guessing, no flying to the US no guessing, no flying to the US, no talking to 5 different branches and hearing 5 different answers. With GloboBanks, the process looks more like this. We analyze your profile and objectives, we decide together what level of US banking actually makes sense for you, we identify candidate banks and account types, we confirm that we can do 100% remote, we prepare your documents, your explanation, your structure, and then we introduce you directly to the right teams in the banks. Instead of you chasing the banks see you coming through a channel they already know, an official partner of them, like GloboBanks. Here's the big picture I want you to take away. Opening a US bank account as a non-resident is not about trick, it's about positioning and partnership. If you look like a risk, the system will close. If you look like a clear, documented, well-presented client with a real business or real assets and you arrive through a serious introducer like GloboBanks, the system opens. At GloboBanks, we live in that space every day. We're not a generic remote opening service that blasts your passport to random banks. We are a banking introduction company focused on serious international clients who want long-term compliant relationships with strong institutions in the US and worldwide. If you want to understand whether you qualify to open a US bank account remotely as a non-resident, you'll find a link below. Answer a few questions about your situation and our team will review your profile and tell you which paths actually make sense for you and which ones you should forget. I'm Matteo Maglia from GloboBanks. Build your access to the US banking system with strategy, not with guesswork. And I see you in the next video.